Hare Krishna, and welcome to this Sunday's virtual Sunday feast here at ISKCON Chicago. On behalf of Sri Sri Kishore Kishori and Srila Prabhupada, welcome to everyone participating, and thank you so much. A few quick announcements before we transition over to tonight's speaker, His Grace Yamuna Jivan Prabhu. The first is festival alert. So it will be this Tuesday, August 25th, we are celebrating the appearance day of Srimati Radharani, Radhashtami. So it's going to be a virtual festival, though live in-person darshan is available. Registration is required through the temple website, and you'll be messaged back with the time slot for the darshan. There's also going to be a class live streamed. Again, that's this Tuesday. The class will be at 6:30 p.m. So please take advantage of this opportunity. Again, it's not the ideal situation, but in the spirit of this festival and coming together even virtually as a congregation, it's an excellent opportunity to break the everyday of this COVID situation. So COVID is with us, but this is transcendental. And finally, I'll turn it over to tonight's speaker, His Grace Yamuna Jivan Prabhu, who's going to be speaking on a grieving warrior. And this is a continuation of our Brilliant as the Sun series. So his talk, A Grieving Warrior, will provide us an overview and insight into Srimad Bhagavatam, first canto, the 15th chapter, the Pandavas retire timely. So thank you so much, Yamuna Jivan Prabhu, for saying yes to this opportunity in the midst of everything that you have going on. So very grateful and also very excited to see what compelled you to break your focus on your development courses to share your insights on this topic. So thank you so much.
Hare Krishna. Thank you for encouraging me repeatedly to do this. Yeah, I am sort of working on a very intensive, what's called Karuna Care course, which is a pilot program in ISKCON for training devotees in pastoral care and chaplaincy training and such. So I didn't know this at the time, but when I agreed to take up this this talk for this week on chapter 15 of first canto, there's so much to be called out from our Srimad Bhagavatam in terms of some of the topics that I'm learning from contemporary authors today, such as grief. There's a book I'm reading called Understanding Your Grief as part of that course. And here we will see very shortly how Arjuna is an exemplar of dealing with grief. So without much further ado, I'm going to begin with the invocation mantras. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunlitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadate Swapadantikam Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripasindubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasani Gaur Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya So we're going to be covering chapter 15 from Canto 1 today, which is a fairly large chapter. We have about 51 verses and covers over 70 pages of the Bhagavatam. So very content rich. A lot of deep messages, very relevant messages for us to apply. So in the less than 1 hour that I have to present this topic, I certainly will not be doing justice. At the same time, whatever we do cover, I expect to be relevant. I hope it's relevant. So backing up a little bit, chapter 14, we learned that Yudhishthira, this is after the battlefield of Kurukshetra and the entire war where the Kauravas were destroyed and a lot of the Pandava side was also destroyed. The Pandavas are remaining as the sovereign leaders for the planet. And then Arjuna accompanies Krishna to go to Dwarka. And while Yudhishthira is waiting for Arjuna to come back to Hastinapur, which is in the area of New Delhi, he sees all kinds of omens. In the 14th chapter, this is described. Fairly gruesome omens, omens that indicate unfortunate evils that are to befall the kingdom of Hastinapur. So he's worried. And then after months, Arjuna is returned. However, Arjuna is not the same Arjuna that Yudhishthira knows him. Arjuna has the disposition of deep sadness. He looks pale. He's lost his luster. He looks pretty terrible. Our acharyas, great teachers, describe that the face is the index to the mind. That is, through the face and the expressions on the face, one can, especially if sensitive enough and spiritually mature enough, one can recognize what the movings of the mind are. So he could tell Arjuna was fairly disturbed. And so he asked, just in a frenzy, a number of questions. What's the reason? And he speculates this and that. Is it because somebody insulted you, Arjuna? Is it because the family members are not doing well? And so on and so forth. He goes on and on and on, asking a number of questions. So that's how chapter 14 ends, with the series of questions that Yudhishthira asks Arjuna at this very pregnant moment where Arjuna is returned home in despair. So chapter 15 now begins with Arjuna's state of mind, and Arjuna begins to speak. So it describes that Arjuna is feeling very disturbed. The Sanskrit is Vishlesha Karshitaha. He's greatly bereaved by separation of Krishna because Krishna has just left. The Yadu dynasty that was in Dwarka, which is in the western part of India, and by the coastal sea of Gujarat, the state of Gujarat, there was this millions of Yadu members of that dynasty, and without the detail, but they ultimately ended up in a fratricidal war of some kind, and they started killing each other. They're leaving just 4 or 5 people, and then ultimately Krishna also leaves. And his departure is very dramatic. But after he leaves, Arjuna has the service, the job, the duty to take all the queens of Krishna. And Krishna married 16,108 queens. So a lot of queens. And he had the job to take the queens of Dwarka back to Hastinapur to provide care to them and protection to them. And Arjuna describes that along the way, he approaches or he comes across some cowherd men. And these cowherd men, they steal the queens of Krishna from him. Now, typically, Arjuna is the greatest warrior of all time. He's able to defeat entire armies. What are a few cowherd men with sticks? Yet, Arjuna was unable to defeat them, and then those queens were stolen by the cowherd men. So, to add insult to injury, literally insult to injury, he was insulted by the cowherd men and injured by the fact that Krishna left. Now he arrives in Hastinapur, totally bereaved, pained, deeply pained. It is described that the pain was so strong. I mean, he was crying. I mean, a warrior, highly regarded warrior, was just crying. His mouth was dried up. His heart was dried. He felt choked up. And it wasn't that, well, he was pained for two things. First, he was pained by the fact that Krishna had left. But he was also pained by the fact that he lost his power. He's lost his strength. He's lost his ability. But for him, more important was the fact that Krishna left. So he says that Krishna has left me alone. Cries out, Krishna has left me alone. And I've lost my astounding power. You see, the fact that Krishna left him alone is even more painful, because Krishna was not just his friend, but Krishna was also his cousin, very close cousin. And Krishna was also his brother-in-law, because Arjuna was married to Subhadra, and Subhadra was the sister of Krishna. So in different ways, Arjuna was bound to Krishna in some kind of relationship. And so in many ways, those bonds were cut by the fact that Krishna is gone. And so he was grieving very deeply. This pain in his heart continued for days as he traveled from Dwarka to Hastinapur. And that despair and that pain did not subside. So now he's here in front of Yudhishthira and speaking his heart. And then Prabhupada, in some of the purports in the beginning part of the chapter, explains that the power and the astounding prowess that Arjuna had came from Krishna, or Krishna's empowerment. So any one of us who has power or abilities or strength is what Prabhupada would say, borrowed plumes. Or we have temporarily manifesting a spark of potency of Krishna. And it's here today and it's gone tomorrow. Just like in Arjuna's case, his power to conquer his enemies was there when Krishna was there, and it was gone when Krishna was gone. And for Arjuna, again, what was more important to him was not that his powers left, which may be something that a conditioned soul may be more attached to, his powers than his relationship with Krishna. But he was more disturbed that Krishna himself left. It is explained that factually there is no one more dear to the living entity than Krishna, than the Lord. Earlier in the first canto is described like this, that the intimacy or the relationship between the living entity and God, or the living entity and Krishna, that relationship is the most congenial form of intimacy. In this world, we're desperately searching for some intimate relationship. Therefore, a lot of people get married. Often those marriages don't tend to be very fulfilling, because this sense of intimacy is being applied to someone other than Krishna. And then so it becomes troublesome. It's like trying to put a square peg in a round hole. So now Arjuna begins to share his heart in understanding about one's grief and losses in life. There's a difference that is delineated between grief and mourning. Grief are the emotions or the feelings one carries within themselves. And mourning is the expression of that grief. And that expression may be of different types. It could be just speaking, expressing one's feelings. It could be writing it down. It could be drawing something. It could be building something, etc. The different ways of expressing one's grief, and that expression is known as mourning. And experts discuss that this kind of expression is highly critical in being able to integrate one's losses in life. So now we'll see what happens with Arjuna as he starts to express his loss to Yudhishthira. So first he brings up the idea of how Krishna has given so much strength to him and to his family members. So he brings up the example of when Draupadi had a Swayamvar ceremony. She had the opportunity to choose her own husband with a fantastic combative match. They had to shoot the eye of a fish that was revolving on the ceiling. Just by looking at a reflection of the rotating fish and a puddle of water on the bottom. So Arjuna is recalling this incident and he's saying, Krishna gave me this strength. And then he recalls how Krishna gave him the strength to defeat even the demigod Indra. I was born with the name Jitendra. And so there are a couple of ways you can understand that name. One of the ways you understand that name is Jit Indra, one who defeats Indra. Or it's another name is Arjuna. So Arjuna was able to defeat the king of the demigods, Indra. And he says that was by Krishna's power. He brings up the fight against Jarasandha. So all these stories are described in the Mahabharata. I don't obviously have time to discuss all of them, but just touching on them because they are presented in this chapter. There's a great king Jarasandha, awesomely powerful king. He had a lot of allies. And Jarasandha was defeated by Arjuna's brother Bhima only because Krishna gave him the clue of how to do it. Then Krishna arranged, because Draupadi, the wife of Arjuna, her hair was touched as an insult by the opposite Kaurava army. And Krishna arranged that all of the wives of the Kauravas had to become widow as a result. So he's just appreciating story after story. He's remembering Krishna, and he's remembering how Krishna has helped him in so many wonderful ways. There was one time they were in the forest, and Duryodhana had schemed to send a great sage who has a quick anger issue. He gets angry very easily. His name is Durvasa Muni. He had 60,000 disciples. So Duryodhana sent that Muni with his disciples to the cottage of the Pandavas, hoping that they will not be able to graciously receive them and feed them, and therefore the Muni would get angry and curse the Pandavas. So by the trick of Krishna, he came to the cottage of the Pandavas he asked for a little bit of food that was left in what's called this Akshaya Patra, or this unlimited feeding pot that Draupadi had, but that unlimited feeding pot had sort of exhausted its contents for the day. There was only one piece of leafy vegetable on the corner that was not cleaned off. So she gave it to Krishna. Krishna ate that, and all of the disciples and the Muni himself who were bathing in the nearby river, they became completely satisfied, full to the brim. So they couldn't honor anything that the Pandavas would give them. So Arjuna is remembering how Krishna saved them from that situation. Arjuna remembered how Krishna helped him to astonish even Lord Shiva, and by which Lord Shiva gave Arjuna his Pashupat weapon. And then Arjuna remembers how Krishna helped him single-handedly defeat the entire Kaurava army when he was in the kingdom of Virat. And once again, Arjuna remembered the battlefield of Kurukshetra, and even though the Kauravas were 11 Akshahinis, meaning they had these 11 groups of elephants, chariots, horses, men, and so forth. On the Pandava side, there were only 7 Akshahinis, only 7 of these groups. So they were outnumbered. And they were outpowered because the Kauravas had the strongest persons. Bhishma and Dronacharya were the strongest person, the most invincible persons in the kingdom on the other side. So Arjuna said, there's no way we could have won. But Krishna, you helped us. So he's remembering these. So this is actually very healing. It's very healing when someone has left to remember the memories of the fond memories that we might have of them. So that's why they generally have a memorial service of some kind. And all of these situations, Arjuna was in the brink of either being killed or desperately, searching for some kind of solution to a very problematic situation. So in our deepest and darkest times, when the intensity of struggle is really high and someone constantly comes to our help, it creates a bond so strong that the heart is forever moved by that sheltered association. So Arjuna was so missing that shelter in his life, his dear friend Krishna. During the Kurukshetra battle, there's so many times, for those who are listening, if you've not had the opportunity to read the Mahabharata and how the Battle of Kurukshetra took place, it's so fascinating. It's so charming, and it's so adventurous and thrilling. There's so many times when the Pandavas were going to get destroyed or lose, and Krishna just helped them in such wonderful ways. So, for example, there was one time, they had killed Arjuna's son, Abhimanyu, mercilessly. So Arjuna made by the end of the day, tomorrow, I'm going to kill the guy who caused my son's death, Jayadratha. And if I don't kill him, I will take my own life. So the Kauravas created this amazing, well-architected plan to protect Jayadratha. But by Krishna's trickery, right at the end of the day, he blocked the sun to give the illusion that the sun had set. So all the Kauravas, the sun is set, battle for the day is done. They started to blow their conches, and then Krishna removed that illusion. And the Kauravas had dropped their guards, and so Arjuna was able to kill Jayadratha. And there are many, many such stories. So as Arjuna is remembering these pastimes of Krishna and how Krishna helped him in so many wonderful ways at the deepest, darkest hour. His heart was just melting with that remembrance. And to some extent, his grief was being pacified. So, now Arjuna turns his attention to Krishna's sweetness. Past the idea that Krishna was providing him strength and protecting him in different situations, now he thinks about how sweet Krishna was with him. He says that Krishna is the personality of Godhead, yet Krishna is driving my own chariot at the battlefield of Kurukshetra. And he blames himself. He says, I just don't have the esteem for who he is. And so I allowed him to drive my own chariot. Arjuna remembers his joking nature, his friendly talks, his smiles. And Arjuna uses a Sanskrit term. He says, Hridi Sprishani, meaning that he touched my heart. Hridi is heart, sparsha is to touch. So Hridi Sprishani, his joking, his smiles, his way of interacting with me, it just touched my heart. We slept together, we ate together, we lived together. And even if I would reproach him, he was so tolerant. So now he's feeling, his feeling of separation is intensified. He said, I'm separated from my friend and dearmost well-wisher. My heart is void of everything. And even though I was the same Arjuna, the same chariot, the same Gandiva bow, the powerful bow that I never let go of, yet everything is null and void. I couldn't even protect his own queens. So when Krishna doesn't empower me, it is like throwing ghee on ashes. Generally, brahmanas or priests throw ghee on the Vedic fire, the Vedic sacrifice. But after the fire is gone, if you pour ghee on the ashes, there's no fire. It doesn't rekindle the fire, so it's useless. So he said, any effort that I put in now without Krishna's empowerment and Krishna's strength is useless. Even sowing seeds on barren land also have the same effect. You sow seeds under cement, they don't do anything. Things, sometimes in our lives, things just don't work out. And we can try and try and try again, and it just doesn't work out. And it's an indication that this is Krishna's plan. Krishna, that's not what Krishna wants. And Krishna doesn't empower. So as Arjuna is expressing his heart in this way, he's now able to be a little more stronger on his cognitive abilities. Generally, when somebody is experiencing deep grief, it's hard to be reasonable. It's hard to think of things with just one's intelligence. But now that he's had the opportunity to express himself, and he's now transitioning to answering Yudhishthira's questions, or some of Yudhishthira's questions, his cognitive abilities are kicking in. So he tells Yudhishthira, you asked about friends and relatives. Well, there was a gruesome fight, like I explained earlier. And in that gruesome fight between the Yadus, it was the will of the Lord. Prabhupada explains that wherever there is peace, or whenever there is peace in this world, it is due to the will of the Lord. And whenever there is upheaval, it is also due to the supreme will of the Lord. Not a blade of grass moves without his will or his sanction. So now we come to probably the most important pivotal point in this chapter. In text 27, I'm going to read the Sanskrit. It's very, very beautiful verse. It goes like this. Deshakalartha yuktani rittapopashamani cha haranti smaratas chittam govinda bhitani me. So he says, now I am attracted to those instructions imparted to me by Govinda because they're impregnated with instructions for relieving the burning heart in all circumstances of time and space. Arjuna's mind now goes to the Bhagavad Gita and that hour and a half or so that Krishna talked to him just before the battlefield or the Battle of Kurukshetra began. Just remembering the Bhagavad Gita had this profound impact on his heart. And he says that my heart, which is burning, is being relieved. Let me tell you a story. This story is from maybe, 10 or 11 years ago, maybe more. I was living in St. Louis, and there was a congregation member that would come to the temple, not every Sunday, but maybe every 2 Sundays, 3 Sundays, something like that. He was a doctor by occupation, and he was fairly elderly, maybe in his 50s. He was an internal medicine doctor. And I would spend time with him in the temple, just sit down, have a meal with him at the Sunday feast. And he had a fiancée or a girlfriend, I'm not sure. Either way. So we build a rapport, we build a relationship. And then I'm sleeping at night with my wife. We didn't have children at the time. I get a call. My phone starts ringing at 12 midnight. We're asleep in bed. I pick up the phone and I see it's this doctor. I'm blown away. It's midnight. Why is he calling me? And I pick up the phone and it was, frantic, desperate. My brother, his brother was visiting him. My brother was visiting me, and all of a sudden he got some kind of, I guess, some illness, some stroke. I don't even remember. It was so long ago. And he said he's in the hospital, and I'm there with him, and the doctors say he's going to be leaving soon, like dying. He was totally, beside himself with anguish and confusion. He didn't know what to do. So he called me. He was that desperate in the middle of the night. So I said, try to express calmly, I'll be there. My wife and I'll be there. We'll come. And just be there for support with you. So middle of the night, we arrived there at 1 a.m. or something. I took the Bhagavad Gita with me. I took Ganga Jal and Tulsi leaf, just in case he leaves his body. And when I got there, the doctor was crying. He was in his 50s. And he just embraced me for having come. And then what we did is I just sat next to his brother and I started reciting the 2nd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. And it was absolutely amazing how I could feel the tension in the room subside. The doctor himself became so attentive to what the Bhagavad Gita had to say. And by the end of the morning, I guess, well, our brief stay in the hospital, and we were heading back home, he was feeling so much more peaceful. And then he came and embraced me and he said, "Thank you so much for coming." And I remember that. And I didn't do anything besides just read the Bhagavad Gita. Maybe show up there, but that was not much effort. And the impression that I was left with was the power of Bhagavad Gita is immeasurable. Especially like Arjuna is saying here, Rittapa upa shamanicha, that the burning of the heart can be subsided just by connecting with Bhagavad Gita. So Prabhupada writes, Bhagavad Gita can be consulted in all critical times, not only for solace from all kinds of mental agonies, but also for the way out of great entanglements, which may embarrass one in some critical hour. Bhagavad Gita is the incarnation of the Lord, and one can experience his presence through the agency of matter. So the book is matter, but we can experience the book as Krishna if read with faith. So now Arjuna, as he's remembering these instructions of Bhagavad Gita, and he's especially remembering that the way Krishna spoke to him was not harshly, was not judgmental, that we may sometimes hear people speak spiritual messages. But he spoke with great intimate friendship. So that feeling with which Krishna spoke to him, Arjuna is remembering. And Arjuna's mind became pacified. It became free from contamination. Bhagavatam says trash, kashaya, becomes free from trash. And then Arjuna attained spiritual perfection. So a couple of reflection points that I wanted to add in addition to what I've shared thus far is that even though Arjuna was grieving for many days as he was traveling from Dwarka back to Hastinapur to see Yudhishthira and report back what happened with the Yadu family and Krishna, his heart didn't become pacified until he was able to start mourning, to actually express himself and remember Krishna. The second reflection is this: the Yudhishthira is not spotlighted in this section of the Bhagavatam. Yet at the same time, Yudhishthira has an extremely important role to play. He's the companion and he's the listener as Arjuna is mourning and expressing his remembrance, his grief and his remembrance of Krishna. Yudhishthira doesn't stop Arjuna from speaking. He just is there quietly listening. And he doesn't judge him. He doesn't advise Arjuna what he should do, which is very nice, because sometimes just by listening, and because Krishna is in the heart of everyone, Arjuna was inspired to remember Bhagavad Gita. Krishna gives remembrance. And just by that remembrance, we heard how Arjuna felt pacified. So the power of listening and just having a calming presence next to a person who is going through some pain, Arjuna in this case, can be a very powerful experience. So I'll pause there before continuing on with the chapter and ask if there are any reflections of your own for those who are listening on YouTube. If there's any, have you gone through some mourning experience, and how did you experience that? And did you have a good listener like Arjuna had? Comments or thoughts or any questions you might have at this point? Yashodanandan?
We may need to give a minute for people to respond to that specific prompt. I personally feel very intimidated to answer that on a Sunday feast.
Yeah, of course. But if there's any particular reflection you might have from this section.
I mean, just responding to your prompt about the power of an effective listener, that can make all the difference. Like, not going into details, but just having that confidant, whether, you know, in my life it's my mentor, my spiritual master, my wife, or my best friend, or, you know, any of those for the different kinds of situations. It's nice to know that there is somebody that to turn to that's not going to judge you, try to prescribe things, or, you know, just hear. And that act of hearing, it's very powerful. Just being on both sides of it, that it can be such a relief. And I just appreciated your highlight of that this chapter has a huge element of just listening. Because Yudhisthira Maharaj just heard Arjuna. So that was really nice. I never really connected with the chapter in that way. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Nice.
I'll just check YouTube messaging 1 sec. I'm not seeing a response to the prompt, though there is a question, which is, how seriously should a sadhika take their bad thoughts, especially if they think no one can see me?
I wonder if it's no one can see me in terms of no one can see me in terms of the kind of no one can understand me. Is that the see me, or no one can see me in the sense that they can't know what I'm thinking, therefore it's okay to have bad thoughts? Do you have a sense of which way it is?
I would suspect the thoughts, because prior to that there was a comment about the face is the index of the mind, and a reflection on how that reminds this person of the Pundarika pastime.
Sure.
Really criticizing Pundarika's spiritual sincerity with negative facial expressions. Gadadhar realized that just as a spark leads to a great fire, bad thoughts lead to bad actions.
Sure. Yeah. So how important, how much importance should we give to those bad thoughts we might have? Well, according to the scriptures, our bad thoughts in Kali Yuga don't have so much weight. They don't produce a reaction. However, there's danger because bad thoughts will lead to bad action. Generally lead to bad action. In rare circumstance, one is able to catch their bad thoughts and not act on it and feel regretful for it. But often bad thoughts culminate in bad action, which then have a reaction. So how important should we, how much importance should we place on it? A lot of importance. Should be very careful. In the 5th canto of the Bhagavatam, Shukadeva Goswami expresses to Maharaj Parikshit that the highly developed spiritualists, they are very careful to watch their minds. They watch their minds like a circus person who tries to tame a wild animal. You never know when that animal you're taming becomes crazy all of a sudden again. So similarly, a advanced spiritualist watches the mind and their thoughts with that kind of scrutiny and with that kind of attention. So yeah, we're meant to give it a lot of importance, feel regretful if there are bad thoughts, and appropriately deal with them, replace them with good thoughts. At the same time, recognize that those bad thoughts are, are a given. And it's not just one person, it's pretty much everyone in this material world has them. Because we're dealing with lifetimes and lifetimes and lifetimes of pain and suffering and sense gratification. So those bad thoughts keep coming up. Yet that is our spiritual culture, is to recognize them and reform them. Ideally before they become action.
Okay, a couple of questions. Let's see, this one may be a short one. I was enlivened by Mahabharata stories describing the different ways in which Krishna helps the Pandavas. Is there a particular author you have read Mahabharata from? I would be interested to know.
I've read Krishna Dharma Prabhu's Mahabharata, and some other disciples of Prabhupada have also written um, more, perhaps smaller versions of the Mahabharata. Um, I don't know of too many other. I was listening to myself and Chaitanya Kishore Prabhu were discussing this, and he has read the one from Gita Press that he was recommended by the Shastric Advisory Council. I have a PDF of that, so uh, send me a note or WhatsApp text, and I'll send you the link to it. There's an online version you can refer to.
And also, I think the Krishna Dharma Prabhu one is also available on Vedabase.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
There's another question. Well, let's see. When talking about the importance of having somebody just listen, what would you suggest if a person doesn't feel like there is that person in his or her life? How would you recommend channeling grief?
Well, to our benefit, there's this Karuna Care education that's begun, that Mother Ramburu is bringing her years of experience in chaplaincy work to the world of ISKCON. And there's certainly many resources I can think of, but there's one that's very accessible right now, and that's these what's called resilience groups. So there's a resilience group that has started there's one in Australia that was started, and there's one that's here in the US, and it's on Sunday mornings, 10 a.m. Central Time, where one can come in a private and not private necessarily, but you're in a group, but it's confidential environment, a safe environment, a guided environment to be able to express one's grief. Yeah. So those things are there, that resource is there. I think the ISKCON Chicago put out some information related to that as well. It's on Facebook, and you can certainly sign up by writing to Mother Ramburu. You're welcome to write to me too if you'd like to get hooked up to that. There are other resources as well. There are persons in our community who are ready to talk to devotees who are going through grief, and again, that's something I can help connect you with. There are also devotees I know in India, or actually Australia, who are also willing to talk to devotees going through grief and are trained in how to be good listeners. Okay.
A couple of other points. So this is more a statement just regarding satisfying Krishna. Also, when Draupadi satisfied Krishna with the vegetables, she satisfied Durvasa and his disciples.
Yeah.
But then writes Haridas Thakur, Prahlad, Jesus Christ, etc., satisfied the Lord, but everyone wasn't satisfied. Can you please explain this contradiction and also the pros and cons of being a people pleaser?
That's a big question, and not exactly on topic. Well, I'll briefly try to address it. In this world, there'll always be two classes of men. Those who are inclined to accept an authority of divinity, in other words, a person God, and others who are not. In the classical terminology, it's demigods and demons, or the divine and demoniac, and so forth. And if one introspects, you'll find, especially those who are devotees, there's a little bit of divinity and a little bit of demoniac mentality within each one of us as well. So there's always these two classes of people or two classes of mentalities. And naturally, when the divine is pleased, when God is pleased, it tends to displease those with demoniac mentality. And the expectation should not be that those with demoniac or the demonic mentality get satisfied, but the divine mentality does get satisfied. So when one pleases Krishna, so in the Bhagavatam, the verse is given that, the fourth canto of the Bhagavatam, Narad Muni is explaining to the Prachetas that just as you pour water on the root of a tree, all the leaves, the branches, and etc. get nourished. Or as you feed the stomach, the fingers and the limbs of the body get nourished. Similarly, by offering one's love and devotion and service to Krishna, then all of humanity also gets nourished. It is important to recognize a distinction between demonic mentality, which is on the surface, on the subtle body level, and then the true spiritual being that is inherently pure, that's within the body. So while the demonic mentality may not get satisfied, the spiritual soul is impacted by that humble and devotional service to God that pleases God. So externally, we may see that people get, when Prahlad Maharaj, you gave the example of Prahlad Maharaj pleased pleased Narsimhadev. And what happened to Hiranyakashipu? Well, he was really upset. And he was killed. But as a result of Prahlad's love and his compassion, he prayed to Nrsimhadev to please relieve his father of his karmic reactions, in which Nrsimhadev said, done. So Hiranyakashipu was benefited, even though he was very upset. And it was like as if, he's been betrayed by his own son. He was actually benefited. So like that, there's a phrase, tasmin tushte jagat tushta, or something like that, which means that if you satisfy Krishna, you satisfy everyone. So even though persons may externally express dissatisfaction as you're trying to satisfy Krishna, on a soul level, they're benefited.
I also had a question. If you could provide a little more detail around the story you shared regarding your doctor friend whose brother was passing, because it's always amazing to hear stories that you shared like that and that others have also shared of just similar experiences where that inspiration came and that was exactly what was needed to heal. And I'm just thinking like that, how do you consider what the appropriate action would be in that moment? Because for them, chapter 2 was the balm that healed or helped them to deal with this very traumatic event. But for somebody else, it may have been taken another way.
Yeah.
With our Bhagavad Gitas and start reciting it.
Sure. What a jerk. I mean, here am I crying and here he's speaking, philosophy. Give me a break. Let's just, be real, be human. A lot has to do with relationship and one's own. So back then, I got to be honest, Yashoda, I don't know what I was doing. I mean, first of all, it was middle of the night. So I don't know what I was doing. I was half asleep. And then secondly, I was certainly not emotionally intelligent enough to have navigated that properly. I'm sure I made tons of mistakes as that interactions took place. Yet, because I think what helped was that there was a significant relationship or bond of friendship between us. And I knew that this person wanted or revered the Bhagavad Gita, right? So he had that, because he had that reverence. And then I asked the question, I mean, it's as simple as that. How do you want me to support you? Very, very simple question, but it can be a very powerful question. If you don't think about it, we know how we need to solve another person's problem. But just ask the person, how can I support you? I may have asked the question, I don't remember. What would you like me to do? I have Bhagavad Gita. Would you like to read? Would you like me to read? And if the person says yes, just go for it. Knowing that you're following their lead. You just, very without ambition, without an agenda, presenting here's one option that we could do in this particular circumstance. But my main goal, my main intention is to just have a calming, listening, and affectionate presence with another person. How that manifests should be something that they are in control of. Ultimately, as I've been taught, we're the servant. In such circumstances, we're the servant and they're the ones leading the discussion or leading the conversation. So as a servant, we can offer the opportunity. If they like it, great. If they don't like it, great. We do something else. We just hold their hand and let them cry or whatever. So it can be very powerful just to ask the question, how can I support you?
Thank you for that. And just reflecting, if I was in that, I guess, the position of that doctor and somebody asked me that question, to be very honest, I'm not sure I would know the answer.
Mm-hmm.
Something probably is a takeaway for myself, just to think, okay, what kind of support would I need when somebody to extend it?
Yes. And every person's grief is unique. Every person's way of dealing with loss is very different. And we have to recognize that and allow for that.
Last comment question that I'm seeing. You mentioned at the beginning you hope your talk is relevant. And then he writes, Narada Muni was everyone's blood type, so to speak, because he made Krishna consciousness relevant for everyone. When people aren't interested in our type of preaching, should we view others as too materialistic, or should we view it as I'm not their preaching blood type?
It could be both. Could be combination. Yeah. There are many people I've talked to and later they became devotees because they talked to somebody else. And then it was very clear, I just didn't either have the purity or B, didn't have the personality that could meet their needs. And that's absolutely fine. We're a diverse group of people inhabiting this earth, and different people are inspired by different people, and that's absolutely fine.
Okay.
Yeah. Can I, if there's no other comment, can I just very quickly sort of give a quick summary of
course,
what happens next?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. So now Yudhishthir sees what happens to Arjuna. He understands that Krishna is leaving. Oh, so Krishna has left. The Yadus have left. He sees that Kali Yuga is now commenced in full force, a lot of violence in different levels. He's seeing envy, he's seeing falsity, cheating, and so then he makes the decision he wants to retire. And then all his brothers follow suit, one after the other. They even leave. They don't care about Draupadi or Subhadra, and they just head towards the hills, and literally head towards the Himalayan hills. And so Prabhupada writes, and this is a very important point that I wanted to express that we can take from this chapter. It's an important theme repeatedly in the first canto and thereafter as well. So Prabhupada writes, as soon as there's some young fellow to look after the household affairs, one should at once retire from family life to uplift oneself to spiritual realization. One should not rot in the dark well of household life till one is dragged out by time. Modern politicians should take lessons, voluntary retirement, and make room for the younger generation. Old gentlemen should leave home for spiritual realization before being dragged by death. Otherwise, it's suicidal. So it's suicidal to stay in one's household position. That's what the Bhagavatam is saying. Very strong messages, repeatedly. We need to have a retirement plan. And it's not 401k. It's distancing ourselves from family life and matter and all the confusions and conundrums and responsibilities of household life, and make a transition to full-time spiritual pursuits. Very important point. And that's how the Pandavas retire. And with that, I'll conclude my conversation here.
All right. Thank you so much, Prabhu. Maybe you should have asked if there were questions after that last point.
No, I'm not going to ask.
Thank you so much, Prabhu, for giving this beautiful Sunday feast class.
Well, thank you for having me, and I hope it was helpful or useful.